Glad to have you here. Okay. The number of attendees steadily becomes bigger and bigger. We're expecting to have a great number of participants today. Great. We have 20 people so far. Going to give a couple of minutes so that everybody can join on time. It's good to see people that we know as well. Right. We're 23 people so far. All right. And now we're going to start in a couple of minutes.
Great, thanks.
Hi, Mary. Welcome. Right. Okay, I believe it's time to start so that to move along and not to keep people waiting for this webinar. First of all, I would like to welcome you all and good afternoon to everyone. And we're very glad to have you all today with us. As already mentioned, the webinar received high interest. We are very glad about this because we're able to offer such interesting webinars that will develop further the knowledge of the professionals. So we're very glad to have you today here. And we are very glad to present today the topic regulatory compliance 360 degrees. Once upon a time, it was only AML, a good fairy tale, right, Anna? But is the reality. So we're going to have this webinar where Anna will explain the whole compliance, let's say, overall system, GRC. And let's say that today's webinar is an awareness-based session. In fact, for alerting businesses and professionals of compliance-related fields of the needs and obligations emanating from worldwide regulation currently in force. The aspect of the worldwide regulation currently in force from a 360 degrees viewpoint. This webinar will inform business and professionals to what policy and procedures you should have in place and advise professionals as to what knowledge and formal qualifications are required to have, and many more. Anna will let you know in a while. Just before we move on, it's good to introduce our presenter for today, a very good associate, Dr. Anna Damascu. Anna, hi again. So Anna,
hi everybody.
Anna has worked with the national and EU supervisors of the banking financial sectors, as well as with banking institutions in Greece and abroad. She was the chair of the board of Transparency International Greece from October 2017 to July 2021, after having served as a researcher for the organization for a number of years. Anna has carried out postdoctoral research at the University of Luxembourg in the fields of European financial criminal law and European banking law. She holds a PhD from Queen Mary University of London in the field of European financial criminal law, as well as an LLM from the London School of Economics and Political Science, specializing in criminal, banking, and financial law. Anna has published extensively in the areas of good governance and anti-corruption, and she is certified as CAM, CFE, CGSS, CIPP, CIPM. She also speaks English, French, German, and Serbian. I think, Anna, next time we need to do it in another language as well.
Serbian, I guess.
Yeah, why not? Why not? So Anna is a good associate trained here at the EIMF, and she's delivering a number of courses with the EIMF. You can find more on EIMF website about the upcoming courses. So finally, before moving to the actual presentation, just to inform you that you are able, of course, to write your questions in the chat box during the webinar or at the very end. Anna will stop occasionally so that to answer any queries that you may have during the session. So Anna, how important is the GRC and how important the regulatory compliance, and if this has changed in a way due to the pandemic? What's more, if you like, how compliance measures have changed due to the sad war in Ukraine?
Too many questions.
The stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So,
I'll be happy to, very interesting also about the pandemic, about the sanctions regimes, and please repeat them at the end of the session, so we'll have the chance to talk more about it. For the time being, it's like a regulatory compliance 360 in 60 minutes. So it's a company corporate compliance. It is, as you very well said, an awareness session, and it, under no circumstances it will offer in-depth knowledge of all the issues. It is just, you know, an overview of the spectrum of what corporate compliance entails nowadays and how it has grown from what once, you know, it was like, oh, they would tell you you're a compliance officer, you're doing KYC, you're doing AML. Now a compliance officer does not do only that, or may not do that at all, and do, you know, other separate things, because there's nowadays very specialized knowledge on a wide variety of topics. So let's go through and we'll discuss. Of course, as Panagiotis said, you may well jump in and ask anything which is not clear or anything that we would like to discuss in between as the topics will evolve. So these are my contact details with the Institute, to which I'm thankful for hosting this event today. And you're going to see, for example, like today is not a course, of course, it's not a class, but what are the learning outcomes, let's say, of the day, the lesson outcome, if we could say that, the lecture. So we're going to provide, as I said, like an overview of what worldwide regulation currently entails, and inform businesses and professionals as what policies and procedures they should have in place, depending, of course, on the particular nature of each business. It's not a fit for all, but it's tailor-made compliance, of course. And advise professionals as to what knowledge and formal qualifications you're required to have. You heard a few acronyms by Panagiotis: CAMS, CFE, CGSS, CIPE, CIPM. I mean, these are all different qualifications in the field of compliance. And of course, highlight the impact of non-compliance and define broader corporate goals. It is not just compliance, we should go beyond. Let's see what this beyond means. So I hope this is going to be an interactive session and not a monologue on my part. So I trust on you for this. Our audience, I mean, who should be interested in joining us today, you may be compliance officers of the public and private sector. You may be any kind of staff of public or private bodies dealing with the so-called risk functions, or you may be officer of some regulatory or supervisory authority, in-house or external counsels, young professionals who aspire to have a career in the corporate controls functions, or even like members of management and board committees of the private and public sectors, and in particular, those board members which have been entrusted with regulatory compliance and risk management tasks. So what is regulatory compliance? Let me take it a step back. You may have heard the so-called corporate governance, corporate social responsibility, corporate governance. This all emanates from the board, tone from the top. It's the board that sets the corporate culture and values, but then comes the so-called risk appetites, management, control functions. We do care about the board qualifications and the board composition because like corporate governance is very much related to those persons and their qualities. And also the governance of certain group structures is very important. And then before going to staff members, of course, which are the ultimate recipients of all those trainings on compliance, it's the so-called the senior management. It's like from the board, the senior management, and the staff members. Corporate governance is about like structures, but it's also about people. And I said, okay, on one hand, there is regulation. We need to comply with certain regulation, be it international, be it EU, or be it national, as well as the in-house corporate rules. But there is always a risk. The other pole is a risk. We have to identify the risk. We have to decide how much appetite we have for risk, how we're going to manage and control this risk, how we're going to monitor it, and how we are going to communicate all those decisions. As I said before, it's the board of directors which are responsible, it's the senior management, but it's also the so-called compliance functions within a corporation. They need to be independent, they need to have adequate resources, they need to have clearly prescribed responsibilities, and we also need to define accurately and explicitly the relation with internal audit. All of that is sine qua non, is like necessary components of a compliance environment within our corporation. And when I say the word corporation, it could be like a public institution or a private corporation that take it just for the private sector. Of course, also I said all that compliance emanates from legislation. And legislation is even produced by regulators. All those bodies. Regulators may be supervisors at the same time, but the two of that may not coincide. So we are compliant, we think we are compliant, but the question is also, what our regulators and supervisors expect from corporations and institutions. It might be supervision of a certain entities of the public sector as well. So in all that, we have to assess what is our compliance culture, what are the benefits of like a good compliance culture, what are the costs of poor compliance culture, and as Panagiotis very well mentioned in the introduction, what are like the periodic challenges that our compliance function faces, and the COVID-19 pandemic has been one of them. For the past 2 years, we are facing new situations in all fields of regulatory compliance, and we need to tackle it. Could be the crisis, for example, the financial and economic crisis we faced some years ago. It was also another challenge, and things had to change also in light of those circumstances. Okay.
I could also add, Anna, technology.
True. Technological developments, they're an ongoing challenge, I would say. Mm-hmm. Yes. So, if you're risk compliance audit expert, you already know this structure. Is the so-called 3 lines of defense within a corporation. They have been structured by the International Association of Internal Auditors. And you see, as I mentioned before, at the top, we have like the governing body, the board, the audit committee of the board. Then it's the senior management. All of those functions are lines of defense per corporation with regard to risk, of course, vis-a-vis risk. And then we have the so-called first, second, and third line of defense. The first line of defense, you know, is like we would say, for example, the so-called front office of the corporation. Front office has management controls and has also internal control measures. Then is the so-called second line of defense, the risk functions. We have financial control, could be security, risk management, quality assurance function, and inspection function. And this is where also the compliance function fits in. And in our third line of defense, we have the so-called internal audit. And in line with that, you know, in parallel, you will see also the external audit. Most corporations or many public institutions, they may be required to have also an external audit, and also the regulator or the supervisor, whatever the case may be, or a joint function or separate ones, they are also applicable and they fit in this picture. So let me drive you. And Panagiotis also mentioned the GRC. It's like a very famous acronym nowadays: governance, risk management, and compliance. Again, you will see, you know, it's nothing different. The GRC function is what we called before the 3 lines of defense, with the same ingredients. And this is like the so-called integrated GRC function. We have the GRC stakeholders, which we discussed before, but this is the integrated function. Don't get confused. It's the 3 lines of defense, nothing more, nothing less. And let me take you now, let me drive you through certain like specific fields of compliance. The title of this presentation was Once Upon a Time, it was only AML. It's still AML for the majority of businesses. It doesn't need to be a bank. It doesn't need to be a financial institution so that it is concerned by AML. Why? Because the crime of money laundering is always connected to a predicate crime. Money laundering, in order to launder money, you need to have like a previous crime via which, by virtue of which, the proceeds were created, which would then need to be laundered. You might have heard like notions like financial crime, white collar crime, fraud. These are all like crimes related to the AML. White collar crime is the form of financial crime. Is that crime that you find, you know, which is sophisticated, which is perpetrated by, let's say, highly educated professionals within a corporation, within an institution. And it's usually a complex one. This is why it's very interesting. It's not like a blatant crime with blood and a corpse found on the road. It's sophisticated and it's often complex. This is why it's difficult to detect and difficult to investigate. The term fraud could be like fraud in the narrow sense, why the so-called deception or guile, but in common law jurisdictions, we use this term fraud to denote financial crime in general. So when you see like fraud, it's not just, you know, deceiving somebody. Fraud might be also AML. Fraud might be, you know, conflicts of interest. It could be a lot of things. And as I said, all that is connected to AML. So it's not only AML conducted through banks, but it's like a series of crimes that could be committed within a corporate environment, within a public institution even, and then connected to AML. But we have to go also to a wider picture. I mentioned before about corporate governance, and this goes hand in hand with corporate responsibility. And we have notions like ethics, accountability, principles, integrity, values. Where do we find all that within the environment of an institution, within the environment of a corporation? These are, in general, as a rule, found in the so-called code of conduct, whatever this may be called in the environment you're working in. It's the so-called business ethics. So this is why this is sometimes called also code of ethics. And as a best practice, it should incorporate not only what the law prescribes as mandatory conduct, what regulators prescribe as permissible staff conduct, but in ideal situations, it should offer to the staff the corporate ethical culture. It should offer to the staff some guidance of how they should react, not only to legally prescribed situations, but also in ethical dilemmas. This is why business ethics, codes of conduct, and codes of ethics are important. And these are all part of the so-called corporate regulatory compliance. It's not only the HR. Some people may think, this is just the job of HR. Compliance doesn't have to do anything with it. Compliance does have to do with it, because if you are not abide by the code of conduct of your institution, then you may face disciplinary investigations. And depending on the allocation of responsibilities within a corporation, it could be the internal audit who conducts such disciplinary investigations. It could be the chief compliance officer, and the disciplinary investigations are also within the spectrum of the compliance function. This is like in case of suspicion that a certain staff member is not complying with the code of conduct or the code of ethics. So this staff member does not need necessarily to have violated a law or legal norm. It could also have violated, the ethics of the company. And of course, disciplinary action. Disciplinary action may be for the CEO, it may be for the HR to decide, but it is the compliance or the audit function which, before imposing the sanction, will have a saying as to whether a violation of the code of conduct has been committed. So we could have from cases of poor performance to a real offense having been committed by the respective staff member. And as I said before, this disciplinary action should be taken by the competent staff member or the competent body. As a best practice, what we say is that the function which conducts the investigation should not be the function which decides the sanction. This is because there should be some division of responsibilities and some objectivity by those who impose the sanction, and whomever is involved in the investigation of the sanction may have lost their objectivity to a certain extent, or may be biased to a certain extent. This is why ideally it's not audit, it's not compliance, it's a third party within the organization which should decide the sanction. Oops. Right. Okay, so let's go to another field, that of personal data protection. It's a field which has been particularly challenged by the pandemic. Why has it been challenged? Because our corporations, our employers, had to keep very sensitive data of ours in the first place. They have to keep, our health status, how much our fever on a daily basis, whether we have been infected by COVID or not, whether we have recovered by COVID or not, and all those data that have been kept during the pandemic by our employer. And not only that, of course, the challenges were further and bigger. it posed lots of questions, and the personal data protection regulators, they had to issue numerous guidances towards that direction on how things should be done. But let me take it, from a broader perspective. Personal data protection is first and foremost a human right. Our privacy is a human right. This has been decided so by the European Convention of Human Rights, by the EU Charter of Human Rights for those of us operating in the European environment. There are also international legal instruments prescribing this human right, and other regional ones and national ones. So it's first and foremost a human right. On the other hand, however, it is a business need. Of course, your employer keeps the administrative data on the staff employees, but imagine, for example, the case of the supermarket, that they want to know, what are the preferences of their clients. This is also data that might be kept, what you shopped on one day, what you shopped on the other day. So this is what we say, knowledge is power, and knowledge is information, and knowledge is like information, and knowledge may be like your personal data. So it's also a business need. This has been recognized by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is a business-oriented organization. But this is also recognized by the so-called General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR of the EU, which is there in place not only to defend human rights, but also to enable the free market, the common market, and the circulation of information within a free market, which is going to boost, free circulation of information and personal data is going to boost the EU market. This is why, it balances those two needs. And let me take you to another very hot nowadays and very important function of the compliance. This is the whistleblowing within an organization, the hotline mechanisms, and any other reporting mechanism. This is a person who blows the whistles, but behind that person there are lots of knives. Why is that? The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, they have estimated that the median losses for an organization are nearly double for organizations that do not operate hotlines. With hotlines, we mean, either telephone lines or emails or any other web-based or like hard copy reporting by the staff members. And they also say that, they have estimated that organizations with hotlines of various natures detect frauds more quickly than those without. You see that an organization with hotlines may detect it in an estimated average time of 12 months, fraud in the wide sense, whereas other organizations, without such reporting mechanism, it may take them, 1 year and a half. This is very important because as the fraud progresses, losses increase for the organization. So this is why you want to detect and suppress any kind of incidents very early and on time. However, 62% of those whistleblowers within an organization, those persons, those staff members which reported wrongdoing, they say that they faced reprisals of various natures, where it could be like being given lower tasks or being demoted or whatever. So this is why you need to effectively protect those persons. The whistleblowers are the ones who help an organization avoid losses. So you want those people to be in a secure environment, in an environment where they won't be afraid to speak up. And you want them as an employer to speak up so that you avoid losses at the end of the day. So you have a financial interest for like securing those persons and offering effective protection to those persons within your organization. And let me tell you that Also, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, they estimated that 7% of the reports made by staff members, by whistleblowers, were made directly to law enforcement authorities or to regulators. They were made directly to the police, to the prosecutors, or to the regulators. Of course, as a company, as an institution, or as a corporation, you wouldn't want to see a wrongdoing that happened within your organization for the first time on the news, on the first page of the newspaper. You would prefer to have handled it in-house first. This is why training your staff on how and why they should report fraud internally is important. But training, of course, should also be, about giving the corporate values to those persons. It's not about just telling them don't go to the law enforcement authorities or don't go to the regulators, because we're going to have also reputational risk and the reputational impact at the end of the day. But you have to convince your staff that you do have values, that you do respect the values, and that you will protect them once they speak up. And nowadays we do have the EU Whistleblowing Directive. Cyprus has been among those countries which have already transposed the EU Whistleblowing Directive into national law. And so this means that all public and private institutions within the scope of the directive would need to have reporting mechanisms and protection safeguards in accordance with the directive. This is a challenge per se, how this whole thing should be set up. Some corporations, especially those that were listed in securities exchanges abroad, where this kind of mechanisms, reporting mechanisms, were mandatory, they may have some basis. But even for those organizations, you should go through the EU Whistleblowing Directive and make sure that each and every piece of your reporting mechanism and of your policy and procedure in-house, they are compliant with this directive. Not the whole of Europe has yet transposed the EU Whistleblowing Directive, but because the deadline for the transposition has already passed, it was like in December 2021, it may mean, for example, that even without a national law having transposed the directive, private individuals could challenge their corporations before a court, because it should have become national law and they are already offered certain rights by this directive. So be careful, be compliant as soon as possible. Sanctions. It's not about disciplinary sanctions. What you read on the news usually is about international economic sanctions. And these last weeks, we all wake up with a certain anxiety, also with regard to how international economic sanctions by international actors, imposed by international actors, the US, the EU, and other influential countries around the world have evolved. And why is that? I mean, this map might not tell you much, but I can tell you that those areas in red are the so-called sanction areas. And today, you realize that particularly this top right part of sanction areas is, a very volatile one, and one which changes on a daily basis. Hundreds and hundreds of oligarchs are being sanctioned on a daily basis. And you might think, okay, I'm not exporting company, I'm not a bank. Why should I care about international economic sanctions? The answer might be that you need to understand all those points that I'm mentioning here, because, for example, on the basis of the answers to those questions, you might be able to predict how the raw material prices are going to increase, how the commodity prices are going to increase or decrease. So what do we need to know about international economic sanctions? What are they? What are the different forms? When they are being used, what are the most important regimes and what is their impact, what makes them effective, less effective, or more effective, and whether there are alternatives to international economic sanctions that you need to take into consideration for the purpose of safeguarding the interests of your company. Let me go to another very interesting function of compliance. The EU, for those operating within the EU environment, has its own market abuse regime. There is a very famous regulation and a directive. It's the Market Abuse Regulation and the Market Abuse Directive, the MAR and MAD. It is applicable in all EU member states. The regulation, in fact, is directly applicable. No transposition into national law is needed. And why you should care about that? You might be the issuer of a financial instrument, so you're within the ambit of this regime. You might have clients which are listed companies, so again, interacting with those clients takes you in a way within the ambit of that regime. Or also you might be, investing in financial instruments as a business. Again, you are within the scope of that regime. And as I said, you may be investors, you may be issuers. What are the objectives of that regime? Practically, the MAR and MAD legal instruments, they create a standard regime across the whole of the EU with direct application, as I said, because the regulation is directly applicable. And they are here, why? So as to promote full and proper market transparency, market integrity, the so-called sound financial markets, and most importantly, I would say investor protection. Most importantly, because investors are the weak part within this bargaining relationship. Practically, the market abuse regime comprises 3 violations. Those violations are at the same time criminal as well as administrative. Is the so-called insider dealing. This means like transacting on the basis of inside information, whereas you should not have transacted because they're inside information, and you should not have abused that information. Is the unlawful disclosure of inside information. So this means that not only when you're transacting, but even when you're sharing this inside information, which you should not have shared, is already a criminal and administrative violation. And of course, any kinds of market manipulation. Market manipulation can take a huge number of forms, from very simple ones, increasing or decreasing the price of the stock, to very complex situations. Even, the regulators and the supervisors may have difficulty in identifying those cases. But believe me, the more complex this identification is, the more severe the penalties become. So be careful. And how does this impact on your business? Depending, as I said, on the nature of your business, whether you're an investor, whether you're an issuer, whether you're just interactive with listed companies, you might need to consider any conflict of interest situations within your institution, within your corporation, and build the appropriate Chinese walls. So who should not communicate with whom? Effectively regulate both physically and electronically inside information which may exist within your organization. Draft the so-called PDMR and PCA lists. What are those? These are the PDMRs are the so-called the high management usually, or certain functions within a corporation which discharge managerial responsibilities, meaning that they have privileged access to inside information, and PCAs are like persons closely associated to them. It could be like their family members. So you may need to draft lists with the names of those people, as well as insider lists, who these persons, the PDMRs and the PCAs, may have, by default access to privileged information. PCAs should not. PDMRs have by default access to privileged information, but the insider list are the list, with all those staff members having access for a business reason, of course, to inside information and the custody of chain on how this piece of information circulates within your organization. So one day, a regulator might investigating a case, a supervisor investigating a case might knock on your door and ask you on the 3rd of May 2021 at 3 o'clock which persons within your organization knew this particular piece of inside information, and you should be in a position to give an immediate answer. This is why you keep all those lists. And of course, part and parcel with those lists and inside information are like making announcements to the markets and to the regulators with regard to any such situations that might be applicable within the company. And having the compliance related procedures and processes in place, it's one face of the coin. The other face of the coin is auditing and monitoring the effectiveness of such a corporate compliance program. This may be part of the business of the compliance function with the so-called compliance audits. This might have been entrusted to the internal auditors of the organization, but it might also be that the external auditors will come and assess the effectiveness of your compliance program. Or the worst case scenario, it might be the regulators and the supervisors who might want to assess the effectiveness of your compliance program. And if it's not to a satisfactory level, it may mean sanctions and pecuniary sanctions or any other sanctions for the company. So ongoing monitoring of effectiveness is the other side of the coin. And what you should consider in this concept of effectiveness, whether you have written policy procedures, whether you have like the designated staff for this function, whether you offer effective training and education, not only to the staff members, but most importantly, also to your compliance officers, which would need like the trainer and would then need to educate the whole staff of the organization, whether you have like effective lines of communication, not only the reporting and the whistleblowing, but whether you have lines of reporting to senior management and to upper management staff, internal monitoring and auditing, as I said, codes of conduct, which go part and parcel with disciplinary functions, and whether prompt response to detect problems through corrective actions has been envisaged. Okay, you have the program, you assess the effectiveness, but if effectiveness is not satisfactory, what's the next step? Has this been envisaged? Has this been implemented within the organization? This is the question. Training and awareness. As I said, train the trainer first, train your compliance staff adequately, and they will then pass, hopefully, this training and this awareness and the education that they need to give to the bank-wide, the company-wide staff. Why this is needed? We need regular, practical, and tailored training to the employees. And this is fundamental because we need to make employees aware of their roles and responsibilities, so tailored training. The aim is, of course, to promote the adherence to laws and regulations and avoid consequences of non-compliance, which may even mean the closing down of the business. This is something that you want to avoid, of course. Protect the reputation of the staff members, but most importantly, of the company. Reputation is everything. And then, as a second step, this whole thing, if it works effectively, it will mean the improvement of the performance, of profits, of efficiencies, and at the end of the day, a safe and sound workplace. And safe and sound workplace goes together with profits and efficiencies. So, I mean, time is about to end, and I just want to stress the takeaway, which I think should be of this session today. An organization might be a victim, with fraud. An organization with poor compliance, with poor audit, with poor functions of such nature may be the victim in the sense, that it might have losses caused by a staff member, by a provider, by third parties. But the worst thing is to be a victim of such losses, and also the recipient of fines by a supervisor, because supervisors may also fine victim organization. This means fine them. Why? Because they fail to take sufficient steps to prevent any kind of fraud committed within the company, because there is corporate liability for that. This is a famous quote, what you see here for all those involved in the compliance field. This is the quote of famous former US Deputy Attorney General McNulty, who issued lots of guidelines on how to ensure corporate responsibility and how to punish financial crime. And he said, if you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance. Compliance is expensive because, as I highlighted before, you need to have all those fields in place in an effective manner, be it data protection, being sanctions, being AML, being market abuse regimes. Of course, they all need money, they all need trained staff, they all need electronic digital mechanisms for that. So compliance nowadays means lots of money, but the cost of non-compliance, if it comes, for example, in the form of closing down a business which failed to have effective compliance, it's even more expensive. So this was all on my part. Many thanks. And the floor is yours, Panagiotis, or to our audience. Should there be any questions?
Of course. Thank you very much, Anna, for your presentation, for the insight about the broad aspect about beyond AML, let's say, how AML affects various functions in a business. I have some questions, but let's give the floor, first of all, see if any of from our participants would like to make a question. Okay, thank you, Rana. Thank you for being with us. All right, just until we receive a question from the participant, just wanted to ask you, what's the relation between compliance and ethics?
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to remind you that slide about the code of conduct. We said that the code of conduct, it's better if it's called a code of ethics, and not only called, but also containing, the ethics of the company. Compliance would merely mean, that an organization, a company is abiding by all those binding rules and regulations. But most importantly, and this is the success of the company, it should, let's say, give some inspiration to its staff members, inspirations through ethics, inspirations through principles. And this is where the tone from the tops and the leading by example comes. It's not just about preaching those values within a code of conduct, within a code of ethics, but it's also seeing how a company implements those values. For example, a usual, complaint within a company, that they're just preaching values. As you know, when at the end of a successful and a lucrative financial year, you see only, the board receiving bonuses, and the rest of the staff members receiving nothing or having even cuts. When this, this value which has been gained by the company is, let's say, shared to all company-wide, to all the staff, of course, proportionately, of course, etc. This is, like a company leading by example, that, we respect each and every contributor of the company, from the cleaning lady to the CEO. This is, an example of like how you lead. Or when you see that a company is really sanctioning those wrongdoers of the company, or that the company is really protecting its whistleblowers. These are all examples, of companies leading or operating within an ethics environment.
Of course, and I assume that investor would like to see this kind of report about whistleblowing and all the procedures that is in order there in the company, so that to trust and go to work or invest with a company, I assume. So another question about the, again, is a compliance. All right, thank you, Dimitra, for your question. Anna, can you see the question, or shall I?
Yes, the implications of not still having applied whistleblowing, but there are matters that should be already aware of whistleblowing in an organization. Okay, so as I said before, even for companies, organizations operating within member states which have not yet transposed the EU directive into national legislation, and because the deadline for the transposition of the directive into national law has already passed, it was in December 2021, a company might face, sanctions if brought before a court, if brought before a regulator for not having put in place procedures for like effective
sorry, Anna,
protection.
The line is breaking a bit. You can repeat.
Okay. Let me repeat.
Comments.
Yes. Yeah. Let me repeat.
Thank you.
First of all, for those countries, let me rephrase my answer. For those countries, EU countries, which have transposed the EU directive into national law, it's simple that, organizations and corporations should implement those laws into procedures and policies within the institution and the next day. But even for those companies and organizations operating in EU member states which have not transposed yet the EU whistleblowing directive into national law, and because the deadline for the transposition has already passed, because it was in December 2021, staff members which have not been, for example, adequately protected within their organization might invoke this protection offered by the directive before court, and then also the company might face some implications, might face some sanctions because it has not adequately protected staff members in light of the regime prescribed by the directive, and despite the failure of the member state to transpose the directive into national law.
Okay. Thank you very much, Anna. What about, is a compliance and ethics training different from other corporate trainings?
This is a very crucial topic. Yes, some people may say, okay, we know how to do trainings, we know how to organize training, we know how to deliver trainings. First and foremost, a compliance training is something which should be held on a periodic basis. It's not just an once-off. It's something like the same, and any new developments should be delivered to staff on a periodic basis. Then compliance training should be a mandatory training. And a mandatory training means that whomever does not attend the training might face some implications. I don't know, like from its performance report being this being mentioned in the performance report, or any other, even sanctions. There are companies that they even like prescribe for sanctions for those disciplinary sanctions for those not attending mandatory compliance trainings. But then what is also very, very important is that, as I said during my presentation, this training needs to be tailor-made. Let's take, for example, the case of market abuse training. This is depending on the nature of the business, depending on the function within the business, this particular business that you need to train, you might need to change the approach, you might need to change the content of the training. Within a bank, for example, you train the dealing room differently than what you train, I don't know, the front office bankers. So these are all components of and things that need to be taken into consideration by those organizing and delivering the compliance trainings.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna. We have another one question from Rana. Do you consider regulatory compliance to also cover monitoring of UBO registered filings and accuracy?
Certainly, yes, because this the UBO transparency, the ultimate beneficial ownership registers and everything is part and parcel of the anti-money laundering regime. So there is no hesitation about this. Yes, sure.
UBO is another hot topic nowadays.
Yes, hot topic, yes, and very much related to the AML. It has always been a part of the anti-money laundering regime and of the KYC, know your customer regime. Now it has been emphasized, and also the developments with the international developments and sanctions, add more significance to that, and hopefully they will push a bit for UBO transparency and UBO registers.
All right.
And another question, and SciSec trust register.
Of course. So, all right. I don't know if we have any other question. I was keeping my notes here. Do all levels of staff within a corporation institution need trainings? Should be the content be identical?
Yes. This is a very common question among the compliance officers. Do we need to train our boards also? They're supposedly highly qualified people with very specialized knowledge, and this is why they're in the board. Do they need training? The answer is yes, they do need training, because they are professionals who need to follow all latest developments. There are professionals which need to lead by example, so we need to make sure that they do know all the requirements of the law. And of course, as I said before, the content of their training is not the same as it would be, for example, the content for senior management or for the company-wide staff members. It should be a training tailored to their needs and also to their time availability. But still, these are, the leaders of the companies. These are the tone from the top. These are those who inspire the values and ethics within the corporations. And we should make sure that, because, they don't sit only in our board, they may have other businesses as well. We should make sure that we have shared with those board members also the company values and ethics, so that they can act accordingly.
Right. Thank you very much. Marielle, how can we keep up with all the latest development? I would say training, but
training and reading lots on the news, on specialized sites, whether you have specialized needs and interests. Make sure, for example, that you are in the mailing list of all those news agencies which produce news in the areas of your interest, news agencies, or I don't know, regulators, supervisors, newsletters also.
Okay. This is Mariela. Can you suggest some sites?
I cannot suggest sites because I would stay here until tomorrow, because we refer
Of course.
to a number of compliance functions.
Okay. The time is 5 sharp. Let's see if we have. We are going to receive any other questions. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, Anna, very much for your time today, for the insight, for the input about AML as a whole, about GRC and beyond.
And beyond.
Of course. I would like to thank, of course, the people that stay with us until the end. We hope that you have found it interesting. If you wish to learn more or get more in depth, Anna will deliver a number of courses this semester. We have planned 5 or 6 courses that you can easily find on the website. About the whole topic that we were talking about, effective whistleblowers protection. That includes, of course, the Cypriot law that took effect. Open source due diligence, another hot topic, and how to find credible open resources. Also IGCA certificate in sanction compliance, and of course occupational fraud risk management. All right, that's all from our side. Thank once again, Anna, for being with us, and good afternoon to everyone.
Many thanks, Panayotis. Many thanks for organizing this, for the Institute for hosting this, and most importantly, many thanks to our audience who stayed with us for over an hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye to everyone.